Hey, I'm Org, and in this video I'm going to review the Kawachi, the first ship in the Japanese Battleship Line. If you listen to other players of World of Warships, you may get the impression that this is a bad ship. However, in my opinion, this ship is very powerful when it is top tier, and can still be kind of competitive in tier 4 games. The Kawachi class were the first dreadnoughts built for the Imperial Japanese Navy. They were based on the earlier Satsuma class pre-dreadnoughts, but with the 12 254mm guns on the Satsuma replaced with 8 305mm guns to give a uniform main armament that was characteristic of dreadnought designs. However, on the Kawachi this was a uniform caliber of main gun because it actually had two different types of 305mm guns on the ship. Now, basically the Japanese realised partway through construction that the British were using a more powerful version of the 12-inch guns than the Kawachis were equipped with, so the Navy pressed to upgrade all the guns to this newer model, but it was just thought to be too expensive. Instead, only the guns in the front and rear turret were upgraded. The 305mm in the wing turrets were much less powerful and had a shorter range, which undermined a lot of the fire control advantages of having a uniform main armament. Two Kawachis were built, the Kawachi and the Setsu. They were commissioned into the Navy shortly before the start of the First World War. At the time, they were the most powerful ships in the Japanese Navy, although not for very long. Both ships participated in the siege of Tsingtao in 1914. This was the most significant Japanese engagement of the First World War. The Japanese besieged the Germans in Tsingtao, although they were too slow to trap the cruisers of the German East Asian Squadron. This battle was also significant as the first instance of an aerial attack from aircraft based on a ship. This was a single float plane attempting to bomb the armoured cruiser Kaiserin Elizabeth, but without success. The Japanese battleships moved into firing range and used their main guns to bombard the German fortifications around the city. With the help of land-based heavy artillery, the port was eventually captured. The rest of the war was fairly uneventful for both of these ships, at least until the 12th of July 1918, when the Kawachi suddenly exploded while anchored in a safe harbour. The cause of the explosion was never discovered, although the poor quality of the cordite stored in the main gun magazines has been suspected. The Setsu survived a lot longer, but not in frontline service. The Setsu was disarmed in 1922 so that the Japanese could comply with the Washington Treaty. By this point the Setsu was very outdated. The Japanese had subsequently introduced the Fuso, Ise and Nagato class battleships as well as the Kongo class battle cruisers. So disarming the Setsu did not diminish the Japanese fleet significantly. However, just because it had its guns removed did not mean that the Setsu had an uneventful career. It was used to transport troops during the Battle of Shanghai in 1937. However, its real contribution to history came with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Setsu was used as a target for bombers refining the equipment and tactics that would be used in this attack. And then as the Japanese fleet set out, the Setsu acquired a new task. Its crew had the job of pretending to be all the aircraft carriers of the Japanese Navy, so that the Americans wouldn't suspect that the Japanese aircraft had gone off to start bombing things. The job mostly involved sailing around Taiwan, making a lot of radio communications, but it was still an important job that the Setsu did that helped contribute to the surprise attack on the American base in Pearl Harbor. In the final year of the war, the Setsu was bombed repeatedly and severely damaged. Although it was not sunk, it was only really fit to be scrapped, which is kind of how this battleship ended after, well, almost a 40-year career in the Japanese Navy. In World of Warships, the Kawachi is a very powerful Tier 3 ship. On paper, I would argue it's much more powerful than the American equivalent, the South Carolina. However, in practice these two ships are fairly equal. Where the Kawachi really suffers is when it gets into tier 4 or 5 games, where the speed and range of the ship, it's good at tier 3, but it's just completely outclassed even at tier 4. In terms of firepower, the Kawachi is a very strong ship. I'd argue that it's slightly superior to the South Carolina. The Kawachi has a broadside of 8 305mm guns, and when fully upgraded, these guns fire 2 rounds per minute out to a range of 9.8 kilometers. The South Carolina can fire further and can also bring more guns to bear directly over the bow or stern, but the Kawachi has very good firing arcs on its turrets and can angle much more effectively, whereas the South Carolina, as you can see right here in a second, has been very flat on to me to be able to bring all of its guns to bear. I can angle fairly effectively against it and still fire a full broadside. Now on the screen now I'll be showing the firing arcs of the Kawachi's guns so you can see just how effective they are for yourself. Now the big advantage that the Kawachi gets though is its much superior high explosive shells, which have a very high fire chance and do more damage than the South Carolina shells, which is very useful when fighting tier 2 ships. The secondary battery on the Kawachi is also quite powerful. It's made up of a 120mm and 152mm guns. The South Carolina, by comparison, only has 76.2mm guns as its secondary armament, and those guns do also fire slower than the 120mm guns on the Kawachi. Unfortunately, these secondary guns only have a range of 3 kilometers, so don't actually often get to use them. In terms of speed, the Kawachi actually isn't too bad for its tier. 20.4 knots isn't fast, but at this speed it's kind of quick enough to get around the battlefield and not get left behind by the action. However, the rudder shift time and turning radius of the Kawachi are a bit lackluster, so it's fairly vulnerable to surprise torpedo attacks. However, when you go up tiers in tier 4 and above, the Kawachi will quickly be left behind, usually, and will struggle to get into the fight thanks to its short-range guns. Armour and survivability is where the Kawachi excels. It has the most hit points of any tier 3 ship, and has thick armour over most of its length. However, the Kawachi's armour does have weaknesses. Firstly, its citadel is not very well protected for a battleship, and is fairly easy to hit at medium ranges from another battleship. The Kawachi has a 305mm belt in midships, but behind this there is only 50mm of armour protecting the citadel from hits that have made it inside the armoured belt. In fact, other than the belt and the turrets, the armour of the Kawachi should be fairly easy for a battleship to penetrate with armour-piercing rounds. Where the Kawachi's armour is effective, however, is in defending against high explosive rounds. The armour across much of the hull is thick enough to stop HE shells from penetrating. The superstructure of the Kawachi is weak, but it's also a small target, so it can be difficult to hit. When firing high explosive at a Kawachi, I aim for the bow and the stern near the top of the hull. There are large areas there with only 16mm of armour, which allows high explosive shells to do a lot of damage. When firing armour piercing, I aim for the waterline and midships at close range. At medium to long ranges, I aim a bit higher up the hull. Still in midships, the Kawachi's armour gets thinner the higher up the hull you go, so you are more likely to penetrate. There is also a weak spot with armour piercing just below the bow and stern turrets. Here the armour, or the hull armour, is only 19mm thick, and behind it there is only 279mm protecting the barbettes under the turrets. Although it's a fairly small target to hit, it's much easier to penetrate than passing through the 355mm total to get into the citadels and the conventional spots. So what tactics do I use when fighting in the Kawachi? The main thing to remember in the Kawachi is to basically always try and close the distance with the enemy, unless those enemy ships have torpedoes or you are outnumbered and alone. Basically, the Kawachi's guns are not really accurate enough to be effective beyond 5 or 6 kilometers range, and with a secondary battery as powerful as the Kawachi has, you really want to get close to the enemy to bring these guns to bear. And because of your thick armour, you can actually get fairly close to the enemy without really having to worry about armour-piercing shells too much. That's especially since cruisers at this tier have very low caliber guns, so they're not actually a threat to you in any range. It's also good to use your firing arcs of your main guns to your advantage. If your bow is pointed 35 degrees away from your enemy, you'll be able to fire a full broadside at them while closing the distance rapidly and angling your armour. There's also the possibility that you can turn during the reload to bring your other wing turrets to bear, or at least your forward other wing turret to bear. I just never found it to be that effective because I never really got back on my original course before my main broadside had reloaded. Another thing I found worth remembering was not being afraid to high explosive. While armour piercing should be your ammunition of choice, when firing at low tier ships such as the Chester and the Chikuma, it's simply not worth the time shooting at them with armour piercing. Basically just switch to high explosive and watch their hit points melt away. Or really burn away would probably be a better word for it. Also, when fighting destroyers, turn away from destroyers once you become a threat, because it will give your guns more time to be effective and give you more time to dodge their torpedoes. However, if you've left it too late and the torpedoes are almost upon you, it's generally a better idea to turn into them, rather than away from them. Your biggest threat at Tier 3 is the Wakatake, since this has the ability to fire torpedoes at you while it remains undetected. The easiest defence against the Wakatake is to have a friendly ship at least a kilometre away from you in the direction that the Wakatake is likely to attack from. Simply that will basically negate the stealth attack ability of the Wakatake. If it wants to fire torpedoes at you, it would have to come within the spotting or detection range of the friendly ship. Which means that both of you will be able to shoot at it sooner, and your ally will also spot incoming torpedoes and give you much longer to dodge them. In Tier 4 or above games, the situation of the Kawachi changes dramatically. Even in a Tier 4 game, the Kawachi is quite weak. All the Tier 4 ships, except for the Wyoming, are much faster than the Kawachi. This means that the battle will start long before you arrive, and your influence will be minor. 8 305mm guns is simply too weak against Tier 4 or 5 battleships, particularly since these all outrange you and have more hit points. Against cruisers your gun can still be effective, but they will outrange you, and if the cruiser drivers are skilled in paying attention to you, they will not come into a distance that you can accurately hit them from. In those games you just have to advance, do what damage you can when you can, and hopefully you'll find a Tier 3 ship that you can dominating the battle. As you saw in that last game, I managed to encounter 2 South Carolinas, which I kind of tore apart, and then wrecked a few cruisers because they got in close to me. I think that's everything I have to share about the Kawachi, so let's talk about this gameplay going on in the background. So you saw me, I fired away at that St. Louis there. My first broadside was actually really bad. The St. Louis angled its armour very well, so I hit with 5 shells, but 4 of them bounced. Fortunately, this St. Louis is basically suiciding straight up the centre, but for some reason I'm just not doing the damage to that ship I would expect to. But fortunately my allies should kill it in a second, though I took a lot of damage from it there as well. So here we go, St. Louis dead. I can stop well, being a bit embarrassing there by not actually doing a lot of damage to it. And unfortunately, at this particular moment in time, I don't really have anything to shoot at, except for this Chester here. And I've got armour piercing loaded, which just isn't going to be very effective at it. But I was hoping a battleship or a St. Louis would show up, or something for me to actually use these shells, but it seems like we have to use them on the Chester. Okay, 1 hit, over-penetrated, kind of what you expect, did very little damage. Whereas if I'd been firing high explosive, that probably would have done about 2,000 damage. Unfortunately, I actually forgot to switch to high explosive, so now I have armour piercing loaded, firing at a Hashidate, which is even weaker armour than the Chester, so actually they've probably got pretty comparable armour. Yeah, either way, this isn't going to go well. And that's when we spot a destroyer incredibly close to us, so I start turning away. As I see it, it's kind of the best thing to do if the torpedoes are in the water at you. I managed to dodge most of the torpedoes, but unfortunately one of them is going to get me here. Yep, luckily it doesn't do any flooding, so I don't have to use my repair ability, and I can use my damage control teams to go out and repair a bit of that damage. And now I've got high explosive loaded, and I can start firing away at this destroyer, but unfortunately I'm just missing. Fire another turret out, misses again, and it gets sunk before my final turret's guns reach it, or turret's gun shells reach it. So here's the Hashidata again. Finally I've got high explosive loaded and can start actually being effective against these ships. 4 shells out, and they all miss. Your battleships aren't the most accurate in the game, but they can do that. Managed to get a high explosive citadel hit on the Hashidate, which took it out with about half of its health remaining. So my first kill and my first real effective hit on the enemy. Actually I think it might have been my first hit that didn't over-penetrate on the enemy, or bounce. Okay, the only ship to shoot at is this destroyer, but I've got high explosive loaded. Fire off one turret to see how good my aim is, and it's pretty alright. Turret number 2. Maybe a bit far ahead. There's 3. 1 hit, did a lot of damage. And my last turret misses. But oh well. So, my team's actually not doing very well here. There's only 4 ships left on my team, but we've all got a fair bit of health. Unfortunately the enemy has 7 ships left. And I suppose I'm partly to blame for that, because up to this point I've actually been very ineffective at using my guns. Basically, after the engagement with the St. Louis right at the very start, I couldn't really get involved in the game because of just my position in regards to the islands. Then I had the wrong ammunition loaded, then an enemy destroyer forced me to turn away and put an island in between myself and the enemy ships. So it's only really now that I'm beginning to get into the battle here. St. Louis, I've got high explosive shells loaded, but they'll still be very effective against that ship. Well, high explosives are effective against anything. Unfortunately, I missed. It is at very long range, so you kind of got to expect a few misses. The enemy are capturing our base though, so I decided I'm going to fire one more broadside at the St. Louis with armor piercing, and then I'm going to switch back to high explosive to try and deal with the destroyer that's capping our base. So there goes an armor piercing broadside. Loading high explosive to get the destroyer. Managed to get 2 hits, does a fair bit of damage there. So, as I said, just starting to become effective now, after it's probably much too late to really win this. We're down to 3 ships on my team. But I'm taking a lot of fire from the back. It kind of doesn't really bother me. I've got a lot of hit points, I've got a lot of armour, and they can't really hurt me that much unless they set a fire. I see a Chikuma with high explosive shells loaded, which is basically what you want to shoot at a Chikuma. Only one hit, but started a fire, and that one hit actually took away a fair bit of the hit points of that Chikuma. I'm ignoring the ships behind me for now. I kind of still want to shoot at the destroyer out in front of me, but it's far out of my maximum range, and because it's faster than me, it's basically not going to come within it. So for now I'm going to try and get this Chikuma, since it's in a threatening position for the cruiser in front of me. There we go, 6 hits, and start another fire, leaving on a tiny bit of health, and that Chikuma is going to burn to death. So kill number 2. Okay, the only things I can really effectively shoot at now are the cruisers behind me. So I start turning my ship to bring my turrets to bear. Unfortunately, I kind of have to turn my ship a bit too much since my turrets are quite slow to turn. But Chester, fire off my high explosive broadside. Don't do much damage, but I managed to set a fire right on its bow. And now I'm turning away to bring my armour on a more effective angle to basically just try and keep its shells out.
Torpedoes, direct front.
Torpedoes were in front of me for a second there, but they're aimed at the St. Louis, so I don't really pay any attention to them. No, it looks like they're going to miss me completely. Okay, my broadside's back up and loaded, so fire away at the Chester. Still only one hit, but I managed to set a fire there. Oh, and I actually have to dodge these torpedoes. Fairly easy though, because as I said, there's a friendly destroyer out there ahead of me, and it's spotting the torpedoes well before they get to me, so I have plenty of time to dodge. The Chester's on low health, and I'm not going to get another chance at shooting at it. So instead I switch focus to the South Carolina in front of me. Again, I have to angle my ship a bit too much just to bring my turrets to bear, but that's kind of expected when you're in a battleship. Fire off a high explosive broadside and then switch to armour piercing. And I'll get 4 hits, do a fair bit of damage with high explosive, but unfortunately it doesn't start any fires. So I start angling my ship back to a more effective angle. I'm still taking fire from the rear, but it doesn't particularly concern me, as I've been saying the whole game. I mean, eventually all this damage is going to add up, but it's such a small amount per shot that it's not that troubling. Anyway, here comes an armour-piercing broadside on the South Carolina. Don't get a citadel hit, but I still do a fair chunk of damage there. Also get set on fire, but I have my repair ability up, so I can just put it straight out.
Problem solved, sir.
Unfortunately, the South Carolina is firing at my St. Louis ally, which means that it's broadside onto the St. Louis, and it's becoming increasingly bound to me. Our secondary guns start opening up on each other, and I manage to set it on fire, but then I get 4 more hits in, and it's still left on a fair bit of health though. I start angling my ship towards it quite acutely because I'm expecting its rear 2 turrets to come around and fire at me, and I want to be heavily angled for when they arrive. And there's one of them which bounces. Fortunately the next one goes through and takes away a lot of my health, but I'm now free to turn my ship on. But luckily I think my secondary guns managed to kill it there, so I'm able to turn and switch focus back to the enemy cruisers, well, and battleship behind me. You see that South Carolina's firing at me and hitting at me, but it's still a decent kilometre out of my maximum firing range, which is the one real advantage, well, one really significant advantage the South Carolina has over the Kawachi. Anyway, I've seen the Chester and I'm firing armour piercing at it because I know that even a single over-penetrating hit will be enough to kill it. And now the South Carolina's in range, and I have armour piercing loaded, but at this range I'm probably not going to penetrate its main belt armour, whereas there's still a good chance I'll over-penetrate its extremity armours since it's quite low. But I managed to get lucky there, and one of those shots actually penetrated. But unfortunately, I'm now on fire in 2 places, and it's going to be 20 seconds till I can put those fires out. Firing away at the St. Louis here. I was kind of expecting those last 2 shells to hit, but they fell just a little bit short. And I'm basically only firing single turrets at a time now, because one good hit will kill the St. Louis. Well, I fired 4 that time. And I managed to get a citadel hit, which gets me the Confederate award and manages to sink the St. Louis, which puts me up on 5 kills with 44 hits and 2 citadel hits. So that's a pretty good game. Unfortunately, I've got very little health left against the South Carolina, and well, I'm probably not going to survive this. I basically have to close the distance as quickly as possible to try and get my secondary guns into the fight, and also get able to just punch straight through its armour. But I can't keep dodging these shells forever. Basically, the closer I get, the more accurate it's going to get, and it's going to be able to start punching straight through my armour as well. But I still have to do it. It's basically the only way we're going to sink this guy. Oh, and it managed to set me on fire, which is basically game over for me. I'm not going to be able to put that fire out. It's just how much damage can I do before I die. And those are probably my last 4 shells, and they all miss. So, bit of a sad end to the game, but we were outnumbered from the, well, not from the start. Basically I got into the fight far too late and my team was already at too big a disadvantage for me to bring back round. And this St. Louis, it's also on very low health, and the South Carolina will just destroy it. This the final game, it's also a tier 3 game. This is a bit of an odd one, because well, the enemy team just had a lot of Tenryus, the Japanese tier 3 cruiser, which is also my favourite cruiser at tier 3 by the way, but that's not relevant to this video. The one big downside of the Tenryu is that it's really easy to score citadel hits on and just do massive damage on, especially if you're in a battleship, but even if you're in a cruiser. So this first Tenryu is kind of sailing all by itself straight towards our team. Managed to get one hit on it there, but it over-penetrates. So fire off another turret. It misses. But thanks to the high speed of the Tenryu, this ship's actually becoming a threat to me. Basically its torpedoes, don't have that long a range, but they could probably actually effectively hit me at this range. I'd have plenty of time to dodge it, but still it's a threat and I actually have to get rid of it. And it wasn't that long ago that it was just some crazy guy sailing straight at our team. But whatever. Managed to get another hit, but again it over-penetrates. And there we go. The citadel hit we'd all been waiting for, and it manages to sink the Tenryu. Oh, listen to that lag. Okay, only ship I can shoot at is this enemy destroyer. Unfortunately I have armor piercing loaded, so I fire off a single turret and load high explosive. Actually managed to get an over-penetrating hit on it there, so it did a bit of damage, but well, I'll take a bit of damage. It would have been better if it was high explosive, but it wasn't to be. 14 seconds until my broadside's reloaded, and at this range I'd expect a couple of hits at least. It destroys 5 torpedoes. But it's taking a fair bit of fire from my team, and while it dies just as my guns reload. So, well, the only ship to shoot at is this Tenryu in front of me here. It's at maximum range, but because it's got quite thin armour, firing high explosive at it's actually also very effective. Tenryu's just a fun ship to shoot at. What you see here is I'm actually kind of turning away from the Tenryu because that's going to close the distance with the rest of its team quickly. Unfortunately, I was waiting to get a full broadside around to shoot at it, so it actually died before I fired a shot. But since I have a bit of time now, and the enemy ship in front of me is a battleship, I'm actually taking this opportunity to reload armor piercing.
Torpedoes to port.
Well, the Tenryu fired torpedoes before it died, but not at me. So it doesn't really concern me. There's another Tenryu out there, but the island's blocking it from us at the moment. And throughout this game, I actually spent my time trying to focus down this South Carolina far too much than I should have. Basically my logic was that I'm here with a bunch of cruisers. The Tenryus are still fairly easy for the St. Louis's behind me to kill, but they're going to really struggle against the South Carolina, so it's my job to take out the South Carolina, and I'll leave the enemy cruisers for my allied cruisers to deal with. What I don't realise, or what I didn't realise for a very long time, was that very soon all of my allied ships are actually going to abandon me and I'm going to be out here fighting all by myself. But this replay is kind of good just to show you the kind of beating that the Kawachi can take and still keep on firing. Now I'm firing armor piercing at this Chester, which usually isn't very effective, but I managed to get one good hit in there and do just under 5,000 damage. But as I said, now I'm turning around, I've almost got shots on the South Carolina, so I'm preparing to meet that one. At this range my shells should be fairly effective against the South Carolina if it's flat on, which it is. So I aim for the waterline. And those should hit around the midships based on its speed. So there goes the broadside. Only get 2 hits, but they do 2,600 damage. So that was probably one penetrating hit and maybe one bounce or one over penetration. Probably one bounce, I'd say. But anyway, turning my ship to angle itself a bit more effectively against South Carolina, and also to close the distance with it. But the South Carolina is turning away, which means it's going to take a long time for me to get in close to it. And if you, unlike me, if you've been paying attention to the minimap, you'll see that, well, most of my allied ships have already left me alone. I managed to get another 4 hits on the South Carolina there and do another, well, just under 5,000 damage. So my guns are doing their job. It's just, unfortunately, I just don't realise that I'm by myself right now, so I'm actually pressing this attack against 3 enemy ships when I really should be running away with the rest of my team. Of course, I don't know why my team's running away when we had a numerical advantage, but they are, and I should be sticking with them. Anyway, South Carolina, it's turned its broadside round, which means it can only fire 4 guns at me, and it's still pretty flat on. Unfortunately, I kind of misjudge its speed, and I only get 1 hit, but it does 2,600 damage. And now here comes the 10 Ryus. I should have been firing at this guy, and you see I was thinking about it, but I decided no, I've got cruisers with me, they can deal with it, I'd better focus on the South Carolina. So instead I switch my fire back to the South Carolina, and aim, and fire off a broadside at it. And unfortunately, well, I only get 1 hit and it over-penetrates, so I don't do very much damage. Well, it does 5,300 damage to me. But also, unfortunately, this other 10 Ryu's charging right in at close range. I've ordered my secondary guns to focus fire on it as soon as it comes within range. But it's on full health, and at close ranges, it's going to be able to torpedo me very, very effectively. But my main secondary guns have just opened up. My main battery guns have almost reloaded. So I fire off a full broadside, get a citadel hit and 5 regular penetrations. Does a lot of damage, but not quite enough to kill it. And luckily for me, my secondary guns take it out just before it's able to launch its torpedoes, or really just as it was turning to launch its torpedoes. So thank you, secondary guns, you saved my life there. And now, kind of like an idiot, I still haven't realised that my team aren't here. I'm basically all by myself fighting these 2 enemy ships. So I'm still focusing down the South Carolina when the 10 Ryu's actually by far the bigger threat to me in this fight because it can launch torpedoes at me. Managed to get 4 hits on the South Carolina, but looked like there were 3 bounces and over penetration. Just the range is a bit long for me to penetrate its thick armour and midships, but I'll punch straight through the armour on its extremities. Well, it looks like the 10 Ryu's actually firing armour piercing at me, or at least something bounced off me there. Switch fire to the 10 Ryu for a second because the South Carolina is angled very poorly. Well, it's angled very well, so I'm not going to penetrate its armour. So fire off a broadside at the 10 Ryu. Only get 1 hit, and unfortunately, I kind of misjudged those torpedoes. I turned to port to dodge the first torpedo, expecting that I could turn to starboard and swing my stern around to avoid it. But there was a second torpedo right to where I was turning. So unfortunately I ended up taking both of them. Really, I suppose I should have just continued with my original plan and dodged the first, but I just resigned myself to taking those hits and didn't dodge them, even though I probably could have. Anyway, back on the South Carolina, the 10 Ryu now has gone behind the island, so South Carolina is the only ship I can shoot at. And well, the only 2 ships left on on the enemy's team. Basically when my team went back and all ran away from these guys, they managed to sink the entire rest of the enemy team. So I've been kind of doing my job here, it's just tying down these 3 enemy ships fighting me when they could have been going off and helping the rest of their team. But still, I'd rather have ran off with the rest of my team. So focusing back on the 10 Ryu, I've kind of by this point realised I'm by myself, so I've got to kill these cruisers quickly because, well, they've been the ones that have been doing all the damage to me and they are the big threat. Managed to set me on fire, but I'll be able to put that, well, it won't kill me. I managed to get a citadel on the 10 Ryu, but not enough to kill it. But my second citadel hit with the second half of my broadside's enough to finish it off. And now the rest of my team's finally starting to get into the action and killing the South Carolina for me. So, that's the game. And I actually managed to win the Dreadnought award in that game, just because I took a lot of damage and repaired it, and a lot more damage and repaired it. But really, if I'd been playing better, I wouldn't have taken anywhere near as much damage, because I would have killed those 10 roos early on. So yeah, that's what I've got to say about the Kawachi. It's pretty powerful in a tier 3 game. It's just that it's so outclassed by tier 4 or tier 5 battleships that it's really painful to get in those high tier games. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, or found it informative or useful in any way, and I'll see you all next time.